Welcome to Mastering the Mic Public Speaking Tips. I'm Emily, your host, and today we're diving deep into the art of public speaking. Whether you're preparing for a big presentation at work, delivering a speech at a wedding, or just looking to boost your confidence in everyday conversations, we've got you covered.
And I'm James. I'm here to learn along with all of you. Public speaking is something that has always made me a bit nervous, so I'm excited to pick Emily's brain and get some practical advice.
Absolutely, James. And I think your perspective will be really valuable for our listeners who might feel the same way. So, let's get started. First, let's talk about speech writing. A well-structured speech is the foundation of effective public speaking. Speech writing.
I guess the first thing that comes to mind when writing a speech is, where do I start? It can be overwhelming to face a blank page.
It definitely can be. The key is to start with a clear purpose. Ask yourself, what is the main message I want to convey? Once you have that, you can outline the key points that support your message. Think of it like building a house. You need a solid foundation before you start adding the details.
That makes sense. So, what about the structure? How should a speech be organized?
A good speech typically has 3 parts: an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. In the introduction, you want to grab your audience's attention and state your main message. The body is where you expand on your key points, providing evidence, examples, and anecdotes. Finally, the conclusion is your chance to reinforce your message and leave a lasting impression.
Got it. Do you have any tips for making the introduction really engaging?
Absolutely. You can start with a quote, a surprising fact, a question, or a personal story. The goal is to create a connection with your audience right from the beginning. For example, if you're giving a speech on the importance of public speaking, you might start with a personal story about a time when public speaking made a big difference in your life.
I like that idea. And what about the body of the speech? How can I make sure it's not just a bunch of information that might bore people?
Great question. The body of your speech should be organized in a logical way. You can use a chronological structure where you talk about events in the order they happened, or a topical structure where you focus on different aspects of your main message. Make sure to include transitions between points to keep your audience following along. And don't forget to add some variety. Mix in stories, statistics, and visuals if possible.
Okay, that helps. And the conclusion, how can I make it impactful?
The conclusion is your chance to leave a strong impression. Summarize your key points and restate your main message. You can also end with a call to action, a powerful quote, or a thought-provoking question. The goal is to leave your audience thinking about your speech long after it's over.
Thanks, Emily. That gives me a lot to work with. But writing the speech is only half the battle. How do I actually deliver it without freaking out?
Overcoming stage fright.
Stage fright. It's something most people experience at some point. The good news is there are plenty of strategies to overcome it. First, let's talk about preparation. The more prepared you are, the more confident you'll feel.
So practicing a lot, right?
Exactly. Practice your speech multiple times, both alone and in front of others. Record yourself and watch the playback to see where you can improve. Familiarize yourself with the venue if possible, and visualize yourself speaking confidently on stage.
What about on the day of the speech? Any tips for managing nerves?
Definitely. One effective technique is deep breathing. Before you go on stage, take a few deep breaths to calm your nerves. Another tip is to focus on your message rather than on yourself. Remember that you're there to share something valuable with your audience. Shifting the focus away from yourself can reduce anxiety.
That's good to know. But what if I still feel really nervous once I'm up there?
It's normal to feel nervous, even for experienced speakers. One trick is to use that nervous energy to your advantage. Channel it into enthusiasm and passion for your topic. Also, make eye contact with your audience. It can make you feel more connected and less isolated. And if you make a mistake, don't panic. Just keep going. chances are your audience won't even notice.
Those are great tips. How about body language? How important is that?
Body language is crucial. It can reinforce your message and help you connect with your audience. Stand up straight, use natural gestures, and move around a bit if the space allows. Avoid crossing your arms or fidgeting, as those can signal nervousness. And remember to smile. It can make you and your audience feel more at ease.
I'll keep that in mind. What about dealing with unexpected situations like technical difficulties or tough questions from the audience?
Great question. For technical difficulties, stay calm and have a backup plan. If something goes wrong, address it briefly and move on. For tough questions, it's okay to take a moment to think before answering. If you don't know the answer, be honest and offer to follow up later. Handling these situations with grace can actually boost your credibility.
Thanks, Emily. This has been really helpful. I'm feeling more confident about my next speech already.
I'm glad to hear that, James. Remember, public speaking is a skill that improves with practice and experience. The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll become.
I believe it. Before we wrap up, do you have any final tips or words of encouragement for our listeners?
Absolutely. Remember that everyone gets nervous, and that's okay. Focus on your message and the value you're providing to your audience. Practice, prepare, and believe in yourself. You've got this.
Extended conversation on specific public speaking techniques.
You mentioned using stories and anecdotes in a speech. How do I choose the right ones and make sure they're effective?
Great question. Stories and anecdotes are powerful tools because they make your message more relatable and memorable. Choose stories that are relevant to your main message and illustrate your key points. Make sure they're concise and engaging. Add details that bring the story to life, but avoid going off on tangents. And always have a clear connection between the story and the point you're making.
That makes sense. What about humor? I know it can be risky, but it seems like a good way to engage the audience.
Humor can be very effective, but it needs to be used carefully. Make sure your humor is appropriate for the audience and the occasion. Avoid jokes that could be offensive or misunderstood. Self-deprecating humor can be a good way to break the ice, as long as it's lighthearted. And if a joke falls flat, just move on gracefully. Don't dwell on it.
I'll definitely keep that in mind. How about using visual aids? Do they really make a difference?
Visual aids can enhance your speech by helping to clarify your points and keep your audience engaged. PowerPoint slides, charts, images, and videos can all be effective tools. Just make sure they're not too cluttered or distracting. Use visuals to support your message, not to replace it. And practice with them so you're comfortable using them during your speech.
Got it. I've heard that practicing in front of a mirror can help. Is that true?
Yes. Practicing in front of a mirror can help you become more aware of your body language and facial expressions. It's a good way to see how you come across and make adjustments. You can also practice in front of friends or family and ask for feedback. The more feedback you get, the better you'll become.
That's really helpful. What about vocal techniques? How can I make sure my voice is strong and clear?
Your voice is one of your most important tools in public speaking. Practice speaking clearly and at a moderate pace. Use pauses to emphasize key points and give your audience time to absorb your message. Vary your tone and pitch to keep your speech interesting. And make sure to project your voice so everyone can hear you, especially in a larger room.
I'll work on that. Are there any exercises I can do to improve my vocal skills?
Absolutely. Vocal warm-ups can be very beneficial. Simple exercises like humming, tongue twisters, and deep breathing can help you warm up your voice and improve your articulation. You can also practice reading aloud from a book or a script to get more comfortable with speaking clearly and confidently.
Bonus segment. Dealing with specific public speaking scenarios.
Emily, what about situations where the audience is unresponsive or seems bored? How can you handle that?
That's a tough one, but it happens to everyone at some point. First, try to engage your audience with questions or interactive elements. Ask for a show of hands or pose a question and invite a few responses. This can help break the ice and get people involved. If the audience still seems unresponsive, don't take it personally. Stay confident and stick to your message. Sometimes a quiet audience is still absorbing everything you're saying.
Good point. What if you lose your train of thought during a speech?
It happens to the best of us. If you lose your place, take a deep breath and pause for a moment. It's okay to have a brief silence. It can actually add emphasis to your speech. If you have notes, use them to get back on track. And if you're really stuck, summarize your last point and move on to the next one. Most of the time, the audience won't even notice.
That's reassuring. What about handling hecklers or disruptive audience members?
Handling hecklers can be challenging. Stay calm and composed. If someone is being disruptive, you can acknowledge them briefly and then redirect the focus back to your speech. For example, you could say, "That's an interesting point, but let's get back to the topic at hand." If the disruption continues, you may need to address it more directly or ask for help from the event organizers. The key is to stay professional and not let it rattle you.
Thanks, Emily. This has been incredibly informative. I'm sure our listeners appreciate all the tips and advice.
I'm glad to help, James. Public speaking is a valuable skill, and with practice and perseverance, anyone can become a confident and effective speaker.
Continued conversation. Advanced public speaking techniques.
Emily, let's dive deeper into some advanced techniques. I've heard about the power of storytelling in speeches. Can you elaborate on how to craft a compelling story that resonates with the audience?
Absolutely. Storytelling is a powerful tool in public speaking. To craft a compelling story, start with a strong hook, something that grabs the audience's attention right away. Then, introduce the characters and set the scene. Build up to a climax where the main conflict or challenge is presented. And finally, resolve it in a satisfying way. Make sure your story has a clear message or moral that ties back to the main theme of your speech.
That sounds like a lot of work, but I can see how it would be effective. What about using emotions in a speech? How can I do that without coming off as overly dramatic?
Great question. Emotions can be very powerful if used correctly. The key is to be genuine. Share personal experiences and speak from the heart. Use descriptive language to help the audience visualize and feel what you're talking about. Balance is important. Too much emotion can be overwhelming, but just the right amount can create a strong connection with your audience. Practice finding that balance and watch how your audience responds.
I'll definitely try that. Another thing I struggle with is making my speeches memorable. Any tips for making sure the audience remembers what I say?
Making a speech memorable involves a few strategies. First, repeat your key points throughout your speech. This reinforcement helps them stick. Use vivid imagery and metaphors to make your points more striking. Incorporate memorable quotes or anecdotes. And consider ending with a strong closing statement or a call to action that leaves a lasting impression.
That's helpful. What about using pauses? I've heard they can be very effective, but I'm not sure how to use them properly.
Pauses are incredibly effective when used correctly. They can emphasize a point, give the audience time to think, and make your speech more dynamic. Use a pause after making a key point to let it sink in. Pause before you say something important to build anticipation. And don't be afraid of silence. It can be a powerful tool to maintain control and keep your audience engaged.
I'll practice that. Now let's talk about dealing with different types of audiences. How do you adjust your speech for different groups, like a professional audience versus a casual one?
Adjusting for different audiences is crucial. For a professional audience, focus on delivering well-researched content, using industry-specific language, and maintaining a formal tone. For a casual audience, you can be more conversational and include humor and personal anecdotes. Always consider the audience's interests, knowledge level, and expectations. Tailoring your content and delivery style to your audience's needs will make your speech more effective.
That's great advice. How do you handle situations where you need to speak without much preparation, like impromptu speeches?
Impromptu speaking can be challenging, but there are techniques to handle it. One method is to quickly structure your thoughts into a simple framework, like past, present, future, or problem solution benefit. Start with a brief introduction, then expand on your main points, and conclude with a strong closing. Practice thinking on your feet by giving yourself random topics and speaking about them for a few minutes. The more you practice, the more comfortable you'll become with impromptu speaking.
I'll definitely give that a try. Any tips for improving my overall delivery and presence on stage?
Improving your delivery and presence involves a combination of practice and self-awareness. Record yourself to observe your body language, facial expressions, and vocal variety. Work on projecting confidence through your posture and gestures. Practice speaking clearly and at a steady pace. Engage with your audience by making eye contact and using the space effectively. And most importantly, be authentic. Let your personality shine through.
Bonus tips for public speaking success.
Emily, what about handling Q&A sessions? Those can be pretty nerve-wracking, especially if you get tough questions.
Q&A sessions can be daunting, but they're a great opportunity to engage with your audience. Here are some tips. First, listen carefully to each question and take a moment to think before you respond. If you don't know the answer, it's okay to admit it and offer to follow up later. Be concise and to the point in your responses. If you get a challenging question, stay calm and composed. Address the question honestly and respectfully, and steer the conversation back to your main message.
I'll keep that in mind. How about practicing speeches? Any tips on how to practice effectively?
Effective practice is key to success. Start by practicing your speech alone, focusing on memorizing the structure and key points. Then, practice in front of a mirror to work on your body language and facial expressions. Record yourself and watch the playback to identify areas for improvement. Practice in front of friends or family and ask for constructive feedback. And finally, practice in the actual venue if possible to get comfortable with the space.
That's a thorough approach. Any specific techniques for memorizing a speech?
Memorizing a speech can be challenging, but there are techniques to make it easier. Break your speech into smaller sections and memorize one section at a time. Use mnemonic devices to help remember key points. Visualize the structure of your speech and create a mental map of where each section falls. Practice regularly and test yourself by delivering the speech without looking at your notes. And remember, it's more important to remember the main points and flow rather than every single word.
I'll definitely use those techniques. How do you handle feedback after a speech, especially if it's critical?
Feedback is a valuable tool for improvement, even if it's critical. Listen to all feedback with an open mind and avoid taking it personally. Focus on the constructive aspects and think about how you can apply them to improve your future speeches. If you receive vague feedback, ask for specific examples to better understand what needs improvement. And always thank the person for their feedback, as it shows you're committed to growing as a speaker.
That's a great perspective. Finally, any last-minute tips for dealing with stage fright?
Stage fright is common, but you can manage it with these tips. Deep breathing exercises can calm your nerves. Visualize yourself succeeding and delivering a great speech. Remind yourself why you're speaking and focus on your message, not your fear. Connect with your audience before the speech. Chatting with a few people can make the audience feel more familiar. And remember, the more you practice and expose yourself to speaking situations, the more your confidence will grow.
Deep dive into advanced speech techniques.
Emily, I've been reading about different types of speeches like persuasive, informative, and motivational speeches. Can you explain the differences in how to approach each one?
Sure, James. Each type of speech has a distinct purpose and approach. Persuasive speeches aim to convince the audience to adopt a certain viewpoint or take a specific action. To craft a persuasive speech, focus on building a strong argument supported by evidence, addressing counterarguments, and appealing to the audience's emotions and logic. Informative speeches are designed to educate the audience about a particular topic. The key is to present clear, organized, and accurate information. Use visuals and examples to help illustrate your points and make complex information more understandable. Motivational speeches aim to inspire and encourage the audience. These speeches often rely on personal stories, strong emotional appeals, and a passionate delivery. The goal is to leave the audience feeling empowered and motivated to take action.
That helps clarify things. How do you handle controversial topics in a speech?
Handling controversial topics requires sensitivity and balance. Start by thoroughly researching the topic to understand all perspectives. Present your arguments clearly and respectfully, avoiding inflammatory language. Acknowledge opposing viewpoints and address them thoughtfully. Focus on common ground and emphasize solutions or positive outcomes. And be prepared for strong reactions. Stay calm and respectful, regardless of the feedback you receive.
I'll definitely keep that in mind. What about the use of props in a speech? Can they be effective?
Props can be very effective if used correctly. They can help illustrate your points, make your speech more engaging, and leave a lasting impression. However, use them sparingly and ensure they are directly relevant to your message. Practice with your props to ensure smooth integration into your speech, and be mindful not to let them distract from your overall message.
Good to know. How about engaging a virtual audience? With so many events happening online, any tips for keeping a remote audience engaged?
Engaging a virtual audience has its own set of challenges. Here are some tips. Use interactive elements like polls, Q&A sessions, and chat functions to keep the audience involved. Maintain strong eye contact by looking directly into the camera. Use dynamic visuals and slides to enhance your presentation. Keep your energy levels high to maintain interest. Encourage participation by asking questions and inviting responses. Address technical issues promptly and professionally.
That's very relevant these days. Lastly, any advice on finding opportunities to practice public speaking?
There are many ways to practice public speaking. Look for opportunities at work, such as presenting in meetings or leading projects. Join a local club or organization where you can volunteer to speak. Participate in community events or workshops. You can also practice through online platforms and virtual events. The key is to take every opportunity to speak in front of others, no matter how small.
Thanks, Emily. This has been another incredibly informative session. I'm feeling more equipped and confident to tackle my next speaking engagement.
I'm glad to hear that, James. Public speaking is a continuous journey of learning and improvement. Keep practicing, stay confident, and remember that every speech is a chance to grow and connect with your audience.
Advanced audience engagement techniques.
Emily, let's talk more about engaging with the audience during a speech. What are some advanced techniques to keep the audience actively involved?
Engaging the audience is crucial for a successful speech. Here are some advanced techniques. Interactive questions. Instead of just asking rhetorical questions, pose questions that require audience participation. You can ask for a show of hands or invite a few people to share their thoughts. Storytelling with audience involvement. Incorporate the audience into your stories. For example, you can start a story and then ask the audience what they think happens next, or how they would react in a similar situation. Real-time. Polls. Use real-time polling tools to gather audience opinions or feedback on the spot. This can make your presentation more dynamic and interactive. Small group discussions. If the setting allows, Break the audience into small groups for brief discussions or activities related to your topic. This can enhance engagement and provide different perspectives. Use of analogies and metaphors. Relate complex ideas to everyday experiences through analogies and metaphors. This helps make your message more relatable and memorable.
Those are fantastic techniques. How do you manage your time effectively during a speech to ensure you cover all your points without rushing?
Time management is key. Here are some tips. Practice timing. Rehearse your speech multiple times to get a sense of how long each section takes. Adjust your content as needed to fit within the allotted time. Use a timer. Have a discrete timer visible to keep track of your time. You can also ask a friend or colleague to give you time signals at specific intervals. Prioritize key points. Identify the most important points you want to make and focus on those. If time runs short, you can skip or shorten less critical sections. Pace yourself. Be mindful of your speaking pace. Speaking too quickly can make it hard for the audience to follow, while speaking too slowly can lose their interest. Find a natural conversational pace. Include buffer time. Build in a few minutes of buffer time in case you need to address unexpected questions or technical issues.
Great advice. How about the use of humor in speeches? How can I incorporate humor effectively without it feeling forced?
Humor can be a great way to connect with your audience, but it needs to be used appropriately. Here are some tips. Know your audience. Tailor your humor to suit the audience's preferences and cultural background. What works for one group might not work for another. Be natural. Use humor that feels natural to you. Forced jokes can come across as insincere. Share funny personal anecdotes or observations. Start. Light. Begin with light, non-controversial humor. This helps break the ice without risking offense. Self-deprecating humor. Light self-deprecating humor can make you more relatable and endearing to the audience. Just be careful not to undermine your credibility. Relevant humor. Ensure your humor is relevant to your topic. It should enhance your message, not distract from it. Practice delivery. Like any other part of your speech, practice your humorous segments to perfect your timing and delivery.
Those are excellent points. One last question. How do I handle audience feedback after the speech, especially if it's negative?
Handling feedback, especially negative feedback, with grace is important. Here's how. Stay calm. Keep your emotions in check. Listen to the feedback without interrupting or getting defensive. Seek clarification. If the feedback is vague, ask for specific examples or suggestions for improvement. Thank the reviewer. Appreciate the person for taking the time to provide feedback, even if it's critical. It shows your willingness to improve. Reflect and apply. Reflect on the feedback objectively and consider how you can use it to improve future speeches. Not all feedback will be useful, but there's often a nugget of wisdom in every critique. Stay positive. Focus on the positive aspects of your speech as well. Use positive feedback to boost your confidence and balance out the negative.
That's really helpful, Emily. Thanks again for all these valuable insights. I feel much better prepared to tackle public speaking challenges now.
I'm glad to hear that, James. Remember, public speaking is a skill that improves with practice and feedback. Keep challenging yourself, and you'll continue to grow as a speaker.
Thanks again, Emily, and thanks to all our listeners for tuning in to Mastering the Mic Public Speaking Tips. We hope you found this extended conversation helpful. Until next time, keep practicing and stay confident.